All right, we're here. Twitch.tv/110sports, 110sportsmedia.com/live, on Twitter as well, on Periscope, wherever you might be joining us. Thank you so much for making us a part of your Thursday. Josh Doring is here with me, like I said, on a Thursday. We got a lot to talk about, from Jimmy V Classic to Ravens Steelers. Wednesday football is just weird, especially when it's in the middle of the afternoon and the Ravens are sending their practice squad out there, essentially. But thank you so much for joining us on a Thursday. Josh, how you doing?
I'm much happier now that it looks like Jalen Suggs is going to actually be able to hopefully play a full season for Gonzaga.
I was on the verge of tears for a good 7 minutes.
It was, that one hit a little differently.
But seriously though, how in the world was it an ankle injury? Because you don't have non-contact ankle injuries without there being, there was no roll. At least it didn't really look like it. From the pain that he was in, I was surprised that it was, they were reporting it to be an ankle injury, because based on the pain and the way it happened on the floor, I was convinced that he was done for the season and that we were going to see Jalen Suggs play a basketball game the next time, when, either for Gonzaga starting in November of 2021 or in the NBA in October of 2021, whatever it ended up being. I was sold pretty much immediately that it was an Achilles injury. I was borderline shocked to see him moving around as quickly as he was.
Yeah, and I was just hoping. We were going back and forth. I had the same reaction. That's an Achilles. That's a non-contact thing. That's a freak thing. That's exactly how you tear your Achilles. And
right.
I was hoping that because he was kind of moving around, and also because of, this sounds sort of weird, but because of the pain he was in, I was holding out hope that it wasn't a completely torn Achilles, where it's one of those weird things, and with ACLs where sometimes you don't feel that much pain, it just pops.
Sure.
So I was hoping that wasn't the case, but the idea of him coming back into that game, I was bracing myself for the possibility he wasn't playing for Gonzaga again, or at the very least that this Gonzaga team that I was sold on in large part because of him was no longer the Gonzaga team that we're both so excited about. And then all of a sudden he comes back in the second half,
which I wasn't thrilled about. I felt like and he was largely ineffective. I mean, he played 26 minutes in this game, but when he came back, he clearly wasn't the Jalen Suggs we had seen for the first, 2 games of Gonzaga season, which is not a knock on him at all. I just felt with the way Nembhard was playing, with the way Joel Ayayi was playing, and the depth that they have, especially with Nembhard, that's the very obvious replacement, and you just sort of move on for the game. I didn't see the pressing need to have him in the game, and part of it was the recency bias of seeing him, because the other part of it was just he wasn't moving his foot at all. When you see someone tear their Achilles, they sort of are walking, they can walk, but they've lost that ability to extend and bend back their foot, because that's where the Achilles is a big part of that. And he wasn't doing that at all. Of course, if they put him back on the floor, it wasn't a torn Achilles, right? I mean, even if there was a slight chance of that being the case, they wouldn't have put him back on the floor. But he was immediately limping, right? When he came back on the floor, I was a little surprised and a little worried that they put him back on the floor that quick. But of course, it ended up not being a huge deal.
I had the same reaction, but the other thing I'll say is I'm not sure that they win that game, or at least that they take control of it the way that they did down the stretch if he doesn't come back.
I completely disagree with you. I thought he was ineffective in almost every way.
He was, but when you look at the first half and the second half, there was a clear fog that came over that team, and they just went into a funk for obvious reasons when you see something like that happen to your teammate, and B, a guy that is special and so important to what your team is doing. Drew Timme was looking intimidated with that fearsome front line West Virginia has. I think the emotional boost that they got from just having him be able to play, even if he wasn't. And I'm not. This isn't justification because I would have probably again we don't know the medical diagnosis. Maybe he was totally fine. It just didn't look like that. So it's fair to wonder why he was back out there in a non-conference game that ultimately doesn't matter. But I think that there was a massive emotional boost that Gonzaga got from seeing that he was sort of at least okay, and right, he certainly doesn't seem like he tore his Achilles. He's going to be able to help this team. It's not something that's going to threaten his career or anything like that. I really think that was a big deal. Just having him back out there really changed their mentality because they were just a little lethargic and lost because that's a scary thing to go through when you see something like that happen to your teammate. I think that was as much of a factor as it was just them playing better in the second half.
Sure, I think you're not giving them enough credit for how they played in the second half, though.
That could be.
But it's a fair point. I also think that they just figured out how to be the better basketball team in the second half at halftime because that's what good teams do. But it's certainly valid to suggest that had some sort of an impact because you're right. There definitely was a some sort of funk. They didn't look lost on the floor, but sort of like, okay, what do we do next kind of thing when he went down. And I think everybody thought that he was done for a long time, but thankfully he wasn't. Real quick before we get deeper into the Jimmy V Classic, gonna talk Ravens Steelers in the next segment. Humor me please at the end of this hour. We'll do stock up, stock down college basketball teams. We like games like that. We're going to play some stock up, stock down. Josh is going to take the microphone in the middle of the next hour to talk soccer. Got some MLS, got some European soccer to talk about. And then John Wall, Russell Westbrook, just trading houses. I've heard news that they're just like going to keep the houses that they live in. They're just going to switch who lives in which one.
Right.
And then
it's pretty much the same salary, so you switch the houses, you just keep it even all the way around.
Exactly, and then we'll do What Are You Watching to round out the show. But Jimmy V Classic. First and foremost, so we'll start with Gonzaga, West Virginia, because that just makes sense, because that was the first game, so let's start there. I was glad to, now, ugly game is a relative term because they still scored 87 points, and West Virginia still scored 82. But when you play West Virginia, you're going to have a physical mentality in a way that you just aren't going to have to with most teams. If nothing else, you're just going to have to deal with the fact that they have a ridiculously talented physical front line in Oscar Tshiebwe and Derek Culver. I was waiting for this was going to be their chance to win a game that was going to be super physical and going to be ugly at times. And yes, it's a 5-point win. And yes, there were, they didn't control this game like they had controlled the first two games that they played in. But I was that was the main thing I was looking for here was could they win and they still shot 50% from the floor and did all those things. But Gonzaga plays a beautiful brand of basketball and West Virginia doesn't. And typically when you're not making all of the shots, the ugly brand of basketball is at least going to show itself quite a bit in a game. So for the fact that they won this game, and it was just a different type of game from the first two, was a good sign. It's not something that I didn't think they would be able to do, but to see them win an ugly game against a tough team like this is another notch in the column of things that you want to see a number one team do.
This is part of the reason you schedule so aggressively out of conference, and specifically when you're Gonzaga. Spot on. You want to play different kinds of teams because you're going to see different kinds of teams in the NCAA tournament.
Right.
I'm an ardent believer in the fact that you cannot win a national championship winning one way, more specifically. They can score 100 on you, and they're not going to probably beat you 52-50, but you're not holding them to 52 points.
Right.
This is one of those teams that if you want something different, there are very few teams in college basketball that give you something different better than West Virginia does.
Mm-hmm.
This is the kind of, it just it's a different kind of challenge. Yeah, the talent level isn't the same as it is at Kansas. They're not that far behind. West Virginia's clearly a very good team, and has some big time recruits, specifically Sheboy.
Mm-hmm.
But right, this is about the culture and the program Bob Huggins has built, and they're going to be physical. They're going to challenge you. It's going to be ugly. It's This is the kind of game, if you're Mark Few, that you want your team playing, and yeah, to see them respond. And that's part of the weird thing about trying to evaluate this is you had two things happen at the same time. They played better and Suggs came back, so it's impossible to tell which was more important, because there's also absolutely an argument that they just were not ready for West Virginia in the first half, but were good enough to make those adjustments and to start doing things differently to account for the physicality and just the fact that you haven't seen a team like this before. So yeah, really good win. They're not all going to be as pretty as those first couple were. It's never going to be pretty against West Virginia. And for West Virginia, it's a really good sign that they put up 82 points. This team could not score to save their lives last year. Yeah, it was ultimately in a defeat, but they're not giving up 87 points to most teams in the country.
Right.
So I think both teams come away happy with this. Obviously, you want to win, but from a lesson standpoint and a what you learned about your team standpoint, I think Bob Huggins has to feel pretty good too.
And that's with Sheboy spending a lot of time in foul trouble. He would, especially a lot of that second half. That's with Miles McBride struggling. He got off to a pretty hot start, and then Gonzaga sort of shut him down. He finished 4 of 14 from the floor. I certainly have questions about where you go in crunch time when you really need a bucket, because it's not Derek Culver and it's not Sheboy. They're just not shot creators like that. It's going to have to be Miles McBride. I think that's the guy to go and get you a bucket when you absolutely need it. So I still have questions when it comes to that, but you're right. If you told me that I could go play Gonzaga right now and my team was going to fight and at times look like they were controlling the game a little bit and ultimately lose by 5 on a neutral court, then all the while one of my two best players being in foul trouble. Derek Culver was really good, 18 points, 15 rebounds. That is, I would take that. I would take that, especially after the start that West Virginia had going out and winning the Bad Boy Mowers tournament out in, I believe that was the Sioux Falls one. There's so many multi-team events, I can't remember. I think it's
in random locations.
Right, I think it was the Sioux Falls one. But you're right. I was impressed by Andrew Nembhard. I really saw the depth of Gonzaga in this game, and the anybody can do it on any given night. Ayayi and Nembhard average combined for 40. Andrew Nembhard so nicely stepped into, I mean, shocking, right? The starting point guard for Florida the last 2 years was able to step in and make a big impact when they needed him to and act like a starting point guard. Shocking. 19.6 assists, 5 rebounds. Ayayi had 21. I think Kispert and Timmy were both a little, like you said, I don't think they were quite ready for West Virginia's defense in the first half, especially Timmy. But then both of them had solid games. I think Timmy had 17 and Kispert had 15 or something like that. I don't have the box score up in front of me at this moment. I lied to do 17 for Timmy and 19 for Kispert. Both of them were fairly efficient. Kispert was 6 of 11 from the field. They found ways to get it done. And when you have the luxury of bringing someone like Andrew Nembhard off the bench to play 35 minutes, we knew that the depth was there. They actually really needed it in this one. Like, they needed Nembhard to come in and do that, and he absolutely did. So even though they didn't control this game the entire time like they had, they only won by 5. I got to see a couple things with Gonzaga that, you know, just sort of keeping a list of things like, okay, they can do that, they can do that, they can do that kind of thing. And they checked a couple more boxes for me in this one. Yeah.
And going to the second game.
Real quick, Jordan McCabe is so bad, and it makes me so sad. He just looks so lost. He played like 8 minutes, had 2 points, 0 assists, and two turnovers, and like then left the game. Like, I wish he was a much bigger part of this West Virginia team, but he's in a similar camp to Mac McClung with me. I just like watched him a bunch in high school, saw him play in person, and he's just not hasn't been able to figure out how to be a consistent contributor, and now in his junior year with Bob Huggins. But anyways, that's really like in terms of the least important things that I saw last night, that's like at the very top of the list, but one that I felt the need to speak up about. But yes, second game, Baylor, Illinois, a game that for a lot of it was much closer than the final score actually represented. It was tied 43-43 with like 13 minutes left in the game, and then Baylor got busy and began to run away with this game. But what do you want to talk about here? What are your biggest takeaways from this one?
Yeah, the biggest thing for me is it's sort of two parts. Number one, Baylor is where Illinois wants to be. This is why when you have a team that's trying to break into that top tier college basketball, you go schedule these games the way Brad Underwood did. Is now you realize where you still have to go to actually get to that top tier. It's a very valuable lesson in terms of, right, this was close, and then Baylor just did what they had to do down the stretch. And the other thing, I was really impressed with Illinois' ability to hang in this game when Ayo Dosunmu was not anywhere near his best, and Kofi Coburn spent most of the game on the bench in foul trouble. This group that is surrounding them, and Adam Miller didn't have a particularly great game either, but all of a sudden you've got Bajanishvili playing the best game of his college career, arguably, kind of coming out of nowhere. You got some other contributions from the less heralded freshmen in this class, not named Adam Miller. It's going to take a little bit of time. Again, winning is a process. It's one of my firm beliefs. You don't just become a winning program overnight. You don't learn how to win as a team overnight. You learn by having experiences like this one, where the team that's been there before, the team that's experienced, teaches you a lesson. But you got to feel good if you're Brad Underwood, because you're not going to have this kind of situation where your best two players are not even where they giving you average performances.
I mean,
and you're still able to.
I mean, probably not. Probably not. But this is the first time that Illinois plays a really good basketball team. I mean, sure, Coburn could not be in foul trouble the next time around, but he could. Sure, Dosunmu might be efficient when he's the number one option, and you have a bunch of highly capable defensive guards on the other team. Maybe he's better, but maybe he's not. Hopefully Adam Miller shoots better the next time they play a team that he needs to not go 0 of 6 from the 3-point line against, but maybe not. I think the two exist at the same time, that yes, you hung around in this game for a really long time with all of those things being true. But if you go and play Kansas the next time you play a top 10 team and you do it again, and Coburn gets in foul trouble early again, and Marcus Garrett's able to shut down Dosunmu, then what if that's just what they are against good teams? Now, that's premature and not fair to Brad Underwood in Illinois, because the point you're making is absolutely correct, that Baylor's really good and Illinois is really good too, despite what happened in this game. But with a team like this, that is expected to beat top 10 teams, it's not that it worries me. It's one of the things I look for in teams that are in the top 5-7 area that aren't usually in the top 5-7 area, is can they go and perform at the highest level when they absolutely need to? And last night, Coburn and Dosunmu didn't do that.
Sure. I have a lot of faith that Dosunmu is able to, based on what he did last year.
Sure.
Coburn is the bigger question for me, because his history of foul trouble, that's not something new. You're absolutely right on that point. There's no guarantee he's going to be available. And from a matchup standpoint, not having him on the floor played right into Baylor's hands, because they were switching everything anyway, and Mark Vital can guard 1 through 5. I absolutely loved Mark Vital. It made everybody's life easier because they didn't have to deal with that towering presence in the middle.
I mean, and Bajanishvili is only 6'9", and right. He basically did what he wanted to do, and no offense to him, but he's not exactly any type of world beater in the world of college basketball, right? It's one of my biggest what ifs of this game. If Coburn's not in foul trouble, I mean, he played 18 minutes. He was, 7 points, 4 rebounds in those 18 minutes. And that's without ever really getting a chance to get into a groove, because you're always in and off, coming in, but then getting another foul. So you have to go back to the bench. And it's one of my bigger what ifs from the game, because it worries me that somebody like Bazanashvili was able to be as effective as he was against Baylor's interior, because apart from Flo Thamba, your poor man's Mo Bamba, they just don't have a ton of size. And Mark Vital's like PJ Tucker in the sense that you never feel bad about it, but he's always going to be undersized against a big guy. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Right. Oh, yeah. You don't want him guarding Coburn. But right, when it's Bazanashvili, you don't feel too bad about it, and he can guard the Sunmu on a switch.
Sure.
And that's the one question for Baylor, with Tristan Clark deciding to retire, that he just needed to step away from basketball with everything he's been through with those injuries.
Mm-hmm.
That's and the loss of Freddie Gillespie. That's the one question, the one difference from last season. So you're sort of balancing that with the addition of Adam Flagler to give you yet another guard that can go give you 20 points on any given night. They're really good. It didn't change my mind.
Sure.
This was sort of my final thought. It didn't change my mind about how I feel comparing them to Gonzaga. Still think, regardless of what happens when they meet, Gonzaga is the better team in my opinion, assuming Jalen Suggs gets healthy. But I'm a big believer in this Baylor team. They're clear number 2 to me. They showed it in this game.
Yeah, I'm so excited for that game on Saturday between Baylor and Gonzaga. Just cannot wait. It's going to be awesome. I continue to be impressed by Adam Flagler. Real quick before we go to break, I continue to be impressed by him. The Presbyterian transfer, he led all Baylor scorers with 18 points. All 3 other guards, your Jared Butlers, Maceo Teagues, and Davion Mitchells of the world, were all in double figures. Davion Mitchell was actually the leading scorer of that trio. They're so deep at the guard position. Their ceiling depends on how consistent their interior play is, specifically from their guys that are actually blessed with more height than Mark Vital is, because Mark Vital is awesome. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
I really love Mark Vital too. But if Mark Vital is the guy who has to spend all of his time on Drew Timme, like, that's Gonzaga. Baylor's guards aren't that much better than Gonzaga's guards to make up for that, because Drew Timme was relatively efficient against the best front court in the country, one of the best front courts in the country, and that's just and Mark Vital's not good enough in terms of stopping Drew Timme if you're Baylor. So that's my biggest question, continues to be my biggest question for them, and we'll really see how big of a deal it is on Saturday, I think, when they go and play Gonzaga. But coming up next, we're going to talk Ravens Steelers Wednesday afternoon NFL. It's the first Wednesday NFL game in 8 years. We'll talk about that coming up next. You're watching 110 Daily on the 110 Sports Network.